word why. What a curious word. The kind of word that can make us cringe, feel defensive, or even distant. But you know, sometimes why is the key. A key that can unlock so much to our lives. Join me as we explore the why with fascinating contributors to the world, those that entertain us, inform us, teach us about life, and if we're lucky, inspire the next in all of us. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and welcome to HeadRoom, a production of Rainlight and co-produced by Old Soul. Let's go. Well, I will tell you this. Again, I'm a lucky guy. I always talk about stories travel, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we're going to go in a number of different directions. Some I've thought about, and some I'm actually really excited to discover in conversation with my guest today, Karl Liapunov. He is the head of energy at the startup lab in Norway. And Karl and I met months ago. Got a chance to sit down with him. And for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, you're going to say, that's the Justin Timberlake of Norway. And I would say you're probably correct. Let me give you a little background on Karl. So Karl, he grew up actually here stateside in Ridgefield, Connecticut with an American father and a Norwegian mother. During his time in high school, he was an avid volleyball player, winning 2 state championships and finishing his last season as the player of the year. I'm not sure if your nickname was Maverick, but that would just totally add to the mythology of you, Karl. Upon graduating high school, he moved to Los Angeles, where he received his degree in international relations and global business at USC. He also spent time working for a number of startups. After 4 years in LA, Karl moved to Houston, Texas to join the energy tech team at Tudor, Pickering, and Holt, an energy-focused investment bank. And while at TPH, Karl worked closely with companies that were developing new technologies to revolutionize the energy industry on M&A transactions and capital raising. In 2021, Karl decided to make a transformational move, literally and figuratively, and headed over to Oslo, Norway, where he lives now. And like I said, he's the head of energy at Startup Lab. We're going to talk a little bit about that. It's an incredible startup just ecosystem, and I'll have him do a much better job of describing that. He continues his love of volleyball, playing on the Norwegian beach volleyball tour. That sounds incredibly rough, Karl. I'm so sorry you have to do that. And he's found a new passion for exploring Norway's natural beauty on mountain bikes and mountain biking, which for anybody who's been there, that is a statement because what an incredible country. Karl, we have a lot of fun sort of off air chatting and getting to know each other. There's something about, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean this with a young professional that I think is incredibly envious for those of us that are not in your generation. Okay. Because there's this willingness to jump into the deep end in a way that I don't believe was a part of. Doesn't mean we didn't have the capability to, but it really wasn't a part of sort of the ether in my generation growing up. I mean, graduating in the mid 90s, we weren't talking about being an entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. I grew up in the Detroit area, and it was, some of the choices were either, get a liberal arts degree or go work for a supplier of the automotive company because that's what your dad did, or maybe your mom did. It wasn't about, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try to knock on doors and see sort of what's out there. And I know what I'm passionate about, the topic areas, and I'm just going to dive in, and I'm going to be an entrepreneur almost by birth. First, as we get started here, talk a little bit about what it was like growing up with an American father and a Norwegian mother in Connecticut. And are we seeing signs of sort of that incubation for you now as an adult male that's living in Oslo?
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks, Rod, for having me on. This is I've been following you ever since we had our first conversation, and I think you're one of the best storytellers I've ever met. So to be a part of the podcast is a real joy. Norwegian father and American mother. It was amazing. I learned Norwegian and English simultaneously, and because of my mom being born and raised in Norway, it was important to her that I spoke Norwegian. My grandparents don't speak English at all, so if I didn't speak Norwegian, I wouldn't really have a relationship with them. So that was it was a foundational and fundamental part of my childhood. Was no, you asked me that question in Norwegian, or else I'm not going to respond. That was kind of how I learned Norwegian, and it was amazing. It was in the beginning. I'm sure she got some she definitely didn't have the easiest time. But I think when it started to click and people around me thought it was cool, I was like, oh, okay, wait a minute, it's kind of exciting. It's kind of different to be able to speak two languages. So I've always loved visiting Norway. I would come to Norway every summer, 2 days after school ended, and then 2 days before school started again. We were in Norway. So we'd pick up and go right away. And in the beginning, it was hard because as a child and as a kid, you want to be home, you want to be with your friends and going to summer camp and all that stuff. But then as I got older, I really started to appreciate what the experience I was getting. And I think that may have been those early forming years of having an uncle who brought me out on camping trips, multiple day camping trips. And we were kind of, you're away from electricity, you're just out there. I think that mindset kind of built up both a level of ambition and, like adrenaline junkie kind of thing, where I was like, I want to be out there. I want to take these risks. I like being a little different. That may have been the impetus for, and the courage, what kind of gave me the courage to make the jump over here 20 years later.
How do you describe the difference in culture, Karl, when we think about the shift? Because you sort of had this sort of slow drip, every summer going over there and starting to probably see the cultures overlap a little bit here and there. But for someone who hasn't been there, what's the biggest sort of culture shock to an American maybe going to Oslo?
It's funny. It's a question I've gotten a million times, and I think my answer changes every time, because the more the longer I stay here, the more I realize I thought I knew the culture and I didn't, but I'm learning a lot and I become more and more Norwegian by the day. And now actually, when you hear me pause, it's because I have the Norwegian word in my head. I was like, oh yeah, I'm trying to say this, but I've actually forgotten what the English word is. It's the first time in my life this has started to happen, where I talk to myself in Norwegian and I dream in Norwegian. So that's really? Yeah. That's been a.
So you come across as a guy with great poise. It's like Karl never just throws something out there. He's always calm. There's a pregnant pause built into every conversation.
It's because I'm sitting here saying, I know what that word is in Norwegian. What the heck is it in English? No, so that's been a new one. But culturally, I think Norway is a beautiful place, and it's also a very privileged place. It's an extremely wealthy country with only 5 million people, and so I think
people don't know that, by the way. I don't think, Karl, that people know that. At least in America, that is a shock to them.
Yeah, no, it's a mind-blowingly rich country from a kind of public perspective, per capita GDP, and I mean Norway is the 7th largest producer of oil and gas, and so there's a long history with the energy industry there that has made it very wealthy, and Norway has been really good and skillful at managing that money and turning it into. They have the largest. At least they used to. It may be surpassed now, but it's one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world that, in a lot of ways, helps finance the welfare system and the high quality of life that Norwegians have. And so, culturally, how I think that plays out is there is a level of relaxation and take your time mentality here that may or may not be afforded everyone in the U.S. In the US, there is let's go get it. I'm going to be ambitious. That's one side of the spectrum. The other is you have a situation with a lot of people in the US that are ambitious by necessity. Whereas in Norway, people study a lot longer. You spend your time and you take your time in school. You take those extra 2 years to take your free masters, or because it's what you want and you want to kind of explore, and then you take a gap year. And again, it comes from, in my opinion, a privileged position, because you're afforded you're afforded that level of leisure and afforded that level of flexibility, because it's a country that doesn't have a lot of people, but has also, again, been very good at taking care of the money it's made. And so that it leads to a level of balance in your life that is there isn't that kind of rat race mentality that I think oftentimes in the US you can kind of fall victim to, but also leads to amazing innovation. So it's hard for me to answer the question without sounding biased one way or the other, because I really now have I've learned the pros and cons of each, and I'm still figuring out which one I prefer. But it's a really nice balance of, okay, I'm going to take time and spend time with my family.
So
I'm not
then,
going to work like a crazy person.
yeah. So, okay. So let's walk the audience. So you had shared with me off air. So I'd love you to sort of share the story. So you decide that you're going to move to Oslo, right? You're
Yeah.
leaving Houston. You're gonna head back to your mother's homeland, and you decide to go up to the startup lab. So in this, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about the startup lab, sort of how many companies there, some of
Yeah.
the success metrics. But what I think is fascinating, and I've been there physically, so I'm thinking about sort of getting out of the Uber and walking right into this sort of, the horseshoe kind of opening there, and seeing all the glass. And you literally said to me, you knew no one, and you went and knocked on the door and basically said, I'm here. What can I do? Which I think is, we see that in Hollywood, and it's like, oh, that's so nice. It doesn't really work that way in the real world, but it does sometimes. So kind of talk me through that. I mean, I think you can get excited as a younger professional. You get on the airplane, I'm doing this. Years ago, I made that decision to move to LA. And it was like the excitement you have in the build up before you go out there. And then there's the reality when you're on I-40 for like hours and what feels like days, just heading west, young man, right? Talk a little bit about the travel and then literally walking up to that door and knocking, not knowing if you'd be rejected.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so I was in Houston, as you mentioned, and I kind of told this amazing team there, and I learned an incredible amount, but was just ready for something else. And was kind of, I knew I wanted to work in energy. I'd really gotten the energy bug from being in Texas, and I had some startup experience when I was in school, and knew that I really liked the dynamism and speed of early stage companies. So energy, climate tech, and startups. That was kind of what I knew I wanted to do next. And I was ready to leave Texas. So I kind of looked around the world, basically. I was like, where do I want to go? And in the back of my mind, I'd always been nagging, like, you've always wanted to spend time in Norway. You've always wanted to kind of see what that's like to actually live there. And so it kind of hit me that if I don't do this now, it's only going to be harder. If I don't make this move now at 24, I think I was at 24, why not? It's only going to become more difficult because you don't have any real responsibilities holding you down. So I quit my job in June or July of 2021 and bought a one-way flight to Norway and just told myself I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to give myself until December. And I knew where I wanted to end up. I knew I had done research on the ecosystem. I knew that, Startup Lab, and there was a couple other players that were kind of touched on energy and startups. But I'd been to Oslo twice before I came, and once was at the airport. And so I had no network here, and it was definitely scary. And talking about it now out loud, thinking back on what I was actually doing, it was tough, or it's kind of daunting.
Ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah,
no matter what country you're in.
It really was. It really is. So I jumped on that one-way flight and ended up on an air mattress on the floor in an empty apartment, and was kind of like, okay, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to have a job and I'm going to have an apartment in a month. Like because that's how long I was allowed to stay at that one place that I had gotten. And month goes by pretty quick. It was, and it was a little naive to think I was going to get both of those done. So I ended up calling my cousin. I was like, hey, I'm going to be, out of a place to live in 48 hours. Can I sleep on your couch? And he was like, yeah, okay, sure. Sounds good. So I ended up being outside of Oslo for about 3 weeks while I was going through interview processes and trying to send emails and trying to figure out, where is Startup Lab? And eventually what I ended up doing is I found someone that I knew that, worked at Startup, or like through a network. Yeah, my friend or someone I grew up with works there. You should just go, knock on the door and talk to him. And I was like, okay, that's kind of where I am. That's what I'll do. So I jumped on the train, showed up to Startup Lab, couldn't really find the entrance at first. So I was like, okay, what am I doing? And that was the other funny part. I showed up in a full suit and tie. So,
yes, you
coming
did.
From yeah.
The American has arrived.
Exactly. Coming from investment banking and being American, I was a full suit and tie, and now I look back on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is you. I mean, you've been here. You see people walk around in t-shirts and shorts, and so I can't even imagine what they were thinking when they saw this guy who's like, yeah, I'm an American, but I speak Norwegian, and I'm in a suit and tie, and I want a job here. It's like, what the hell? I don't know how they would
Come
react.
back tomorrow.
Yeah, so that's basically what happened. Is like, come in, I knocked on the door, and I met with Gisla, who is the kind of lead of the ventures team here. And I was just like, hey, I'm super interested in startups. I really want to work with investing in them and helping startups, especially on the energy side of things. And I think knowing them as well as I do now, I think they probably saw they appreciated the level of ambition, and that's kind of something we try to foster here in Startup Lab, is that think ambitious, think big, run fast. And so they probably appreciated a little bit of that, but there was also a huge stroke of luck in the sense that they had a position that was kind of out, and it was a business developer thing, but it didn't really fit my resume, but I applied anyway. And I was like, hey, I want to be a part of this. I think what you're doing is amazing. And I want to join the team. And I went through about 4 interview processes, and they're all kind of like, it all started with like, who are you? How are you here? What is happening? And why are you in a suit? And I think by the end, I dropped the tie, but I was still wearing a suit in my final interview. And I think after 4 rounds or something, they were like, well, listen, we want you. We don't know exactly what you're going to do at first, but we want you on the team. And I mean, I couldn't have been happier, and I couldn't have been luckier to end up at such an amazing place. And just for the viewers, this is not a green screen in the back. This is what the actual incubator
real.
looks like. It's real. You've been here. And so
it's an awesome space.
It is a really, really amazing place. I kind of had done my research before I came and knew that it was, the top incubator in Norway, and they had built some really successful, or helped a lot of successful companies, but it didn't really sink in until I actually got to kind of know the nuts and bolts of Startup Lab, how skillful and how great the people who have built this place up, and the people who have worked here before me, how great of a job they've done.
Talk about how many companies are there, and sort of I was amazed by the number of startups that apply to be a part of Startup Lab, and just, I mean, this is not a sort of open the door to everyone approach at all.
Yeah. So it is so the incubator itself, we have one here in Oslo, and then we have one in Bergen, which is the kind of the second city in Norway. And in Oslo, there are about 100 companies here at any one point. But we get about 600 applications a year. We take in less than 10% of those. So it's a highly selective program. And part of that is because we only work with Norwegian companies, and the ones that we do work with, they have to be tech focused. They have to have some sort of scalable technology. It can be hardware, it can be software, but it has to be some sort of, technically advanced stuff they're working on. And they have to have international ambitions. So the companies that come in can't necessarily just be focused on Norway as their market, but they have to have this kind of, we're going after the world mentality. And then it's, again, after that, there's an interview process, and it's highly selective to try to get in. But once you're in, you get access to the amazing network that Startup Lab has, from the investor side of things, from the corporate partner side of things, the government entities that we work with, students and universities and recruiting. So Startup Lab is an incubator to the physical space behind us, but we also have a venture capital team that invests in about 1 out of the 4 companies that come in. So the stage that they're in, we call it pre-seed, but the companies that are here, when they move in, they're about 3, maybe 2, 3 employees. So it's really early stage, but they've gotten past like a PowerPoint. They're beyond the idea phase. And the largest office we have is about 25, give or take. But we had a company that squeezed 40 people in there, so they use their resources well. So that's kind of the range of size of company. And the fun part of it is that, on average, one company moves in and one company moves out every week. So we have a turnover
every
about
week.
50 every week. Yeah, on average. Sometimes it's 3 a month. Sometimes it's 3 a month. Other times it's 10. But the idea is it's 1 a week, because we want them to move out quickly. We want them to come in. You've got 3-4 employees. You go, off in the next 12 months, you're on a rocket ship, and we want to help them grow as fast
Is
as
that
possible.
the average
and then
stay? 12 months.
12 months is on the shorter end. It's probably 12 to 36 is typically where they fall. Again, and some extremes on either end. Some grow really fast and are only here for a little stint. Others take a couple of years to figure out what they're, they pivoted once and they figured out, okay, this is actually where we want to spend time. And so we've had about 450 companies come through the incubator. 70% of those are still active today, which is just really defies all these startup numbers you see out there. Usually the kind of the go-to is that 1 out of 10 startups survive. And to have 70% of the companies come out of Startup Lab still be active today is a number we're pretty proud of. And again, these aren't Startup Lab made companies. These aren't Startup Lab, but we help them along their journey. These are founders that are super talented and know end, but use us to however they need, whether it's fundraising or it's recruiting. We try to be a kind of Swiss Army knife for them.
HeadRoom is produced by Old Soul, a one-stop marketing agency that understands the power of brand and nuance. Reach out to my guy Matt at Old Soul and supercharge your brand and content strategy. That's Old Soul. Shoot Matt a note at aoldsoul.com. That's AOLDSOUL.com. And now, back to our guest. One big difference, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, my perception may be wrong, but the one thing that I noticed when I was there, and speaking with different people there, to include Rolf, who, one of the founders of Startup Lab, if you want, you can talk a little bit about him and his previous success. But I have experienced startups that have been a part of incubators in different parts of the world, where the incubator, if I'm a cynic, was more about the organizers than it truly was about the startups. It was almost like a vehicle to create a pipeline for them. And so it was operated in that manner. And so you kind of got a lot of mixed reviews from the startup folks that was sort of like, well, we did it because we felt like we needed to do it, but then we lost our backside on percentage of ownership, and we kind of lost our idea along the way. Startup Lab feels very, very different. I don't want to be naive at all, but that is a healthy ecosystem. It's sort of like you have sort of all the parts and pieces there to thrive, regardless of sort of the gale force winds that might be outside. And that feels different. Am I wrong, or am I reading this correctly?
Yeah, it's great to hear you say that, because that is absolutely the goal of Startup Lab. Is that we have a motto that is basically, it's almost required to get it tattooed on your forehead when you walk in, but it's founders first. Is literally every decision we make. And to be frank, when I moved in, or when I started, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, everyone says that. We're here for the founders. We're here for. That's what all startup ecosystems say. And after 3 weeks of working here, it's like, oh, okay, no, this is something we live and we breathe. And, it shows through. There's been plenty of examples of financial opportunities that Startup Lab has had that would not have been in the best interest of the startup, that we have said, absolutely not, we're not going to get involved. That's not in the best interest of the founders. That's not for us. And that kind of goes back to the impetus that why Startup Lab was founded. The Norwegian ecosystem is relatively young comparatively to, especially, in the Nordics, but especially globally. Startup Lab was founded in 2012, and at that time there wasn't a lot of there was very little early stage financing to be found for startups. But being a founder in Norway was in a sense looked down upon. It was if you ask the people who started Startup Lab, like Rolf included, when he was a founder, you would get the response from everybody else. It's like, you're a founder, like why don't you get a real job? And
is that culturally being risk averse? Because you want something that's tried and true, that's a legacy opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's an absolute risk aversion, and there's also a Norway was built on heavy industry, built on corporate, built on natural resources. The oil boom of the 70s made Norway what it is today, and it created a lot of companies that it's a much more traditional, historically thinking country that has led to amazing developments and a collective mentality that makes it the great society it is. But it is not historically a culture that fosters or encouraged kind of innovation and founders, which has dramatically changed. It's definitely that way now. But that was, again, the reason for starting Startup Lab was the founders like Rolf, who is one of my absolute mentors in life now, and I look up to him. Like you could do a whole session on him, but they started Startup Lab to make it easier for people to start companies in Norway. The only reason was we want to encourage people to start companies, we want to encourage innovation, and we want to make it founder friendly. And so when we invest in companies, we invest on very founder friendly terms. We have the incubator itself is a nonprofit, so we basically break even on the incubator itself. So it's financed largely by corporate partners that like the 30 largest, give or take, companies in Norway are corporate partners of Startup Lab, and their membership helps finance the incubator. And even there are corporate partners that we've said no to, that you can't be a member of Startup Lab because their incentive or their reasoning behind wanting to be a member is to sell to the startups, and that's not in the founder's best interest. So Startup Lab, while in my tenure here, has said no to people, or it has said no to top line income as sponsorship, because it's not necessarily in the founder's best interest. So again, great to hear you say, and that you got that feeling. And then that's because that is really, and that's what's made it so successful, in my opinion. I think that's what we have. If you ask the people that have been through here, they come back and they love to spend time here. They want to get back to the ecosystem. They want to encourage other founders, and they speak about Startup Lab positively because we want to be friends. We want to be, the people you call when you're having a hard time.
It's not just the ones
that you call when. Yeah.
Let's pivot. I want to pivot to energy because it has stuck with me since I've been there, and across the Nordics, but especially in Oslo, is the dedication, what feels like at every level of society, to supporting a healthier planet Earth, if I can sort of put a very broad stroke sort of statement here. Talk a little bit about the energy space in Oslo. But if you don't mind kind of giving some color to what I'm talking about, like here in the US, if people are talking about climate change or whatever it has to do with sustainability, let's say, water insecurity, food, all these sorts of things, it's because you've gone to a talk or you decided to seek out an article. It's not just something that you talk about at the bus stop or the soccer game or at a cocktail party, but there you do. That's what was my experience. And in that, I think there's one great irony that I think we would struggle with here. Maybe I'm wrong. So I'll say that I'll take ownership of this opinion or perspective, is that you're sitting on all that oil, right? And so there's this great irony that there's this nation that is the seventh largest producer, and yet you are, I would say, the front runner in energy science and technology. Yet you're sitting on, this wealth of oil where I guess you could choose not to be so progressive. And so how do you square that as a society? And does it look hypocritical? Does it aid in sort of the conversation and the argument for why? Give us sort of the state of the union for those that aren't really aware of the role climate, sustainability, and health have on the culture there.
It is a bear of a question, because it has so many. You can have so many different views on it, opinions on it, and I think without a doubt it looks hypocritical. Like in a sense it is, because. But again, even saying that, it's like in a time like in 2023, Russia pulls out of delivering gas to Europe, causing a huge energy security problem. Because of that, Norway steps up and is now the largest producer and deliverer of energy to all of Europe. And that's on the gas side. And so from an energy security perspective, it's like, okay, well, if you didn't have the the natural resources and the oil and gas production that Norway has, Europe would be in a really tough spot right now. You'd have energy prices that are, I mean, you wouldn't have it. You'd have blackouts in Europe, and it would be really bad. And it's also led to, I think there's a hypocriticalness, but it's also led to a sense of acknowledgement and responsibility in the culture that the people own it. And internally in Norway, there's hot debates as to whether we should turn off oil and gas right away, whether we should keep.
So that is an actual argument that people will make. That
Literally
turn it off.
There are political parties that want to turn off oil and gas like tomorrow, at least in rhetoric. And then so that is absolutely a debate here in the country. But there is also an acknowledgement across the board that it's led to the society that we have, and it's led to the privileges that we have. In large part, there are other things as well. Shipping industry, salmon, these are all big industries in Norway. But oil and gas and energy has been historically what put Norway on the kind of the global, as a global leader. But there is such an ownership of that, and I think that's what you're talking about, that you felt that people understand we have a responsibility because of the money we have and because of the oil and gas producer we are, to be as clean as possible and as forward thinking and innovative as possible in our home country on technology, on recycling, on use of carbon emission reduction as possible. So the domestic profile of Norway's energy usage is 98% renewable. Basically the entire country is run on renewable. Yeah. So it's from that perspective. And last month, I think it's 82 or 83% of all new cars sold were electric. And so there's a massive kind of ownership and responsibility of, okay, we understand that oil and gas is complicated. It's really important right now. It's really important to maintaining civilization kind of in the short term. But we also know that we need to start to think differently, both from a climate perspective, but also an economic perspective. We need to diversify the industries we have. We need to think about how do we need to build new export industries in Norway. And so that is what has caused this big revolution in Norway over the last 10 years on the climate tech and energy side of things. You have these people who have been a part of the energy industry and worked for the Equinors of the world for 20 years and are experts on offshore platforms, have seen holes in the market or have seen opportunities in renewables that are now kind of coming through the startup club doors and saying, hey, I have this idea. I've been working in energy for 20 years. And I want to build this product because I know that the market needs it. And I've got 20 years of experience to do it. And so that's been like, holy crap, these super experienced founders with very, very specific and targeted experience are coming and building energy companies that are being developed and produced at like a really inspiring rate for me, at least. And that, I think, goes back to what you said on the culture side of things, is there is a feeling of a collective responsibility to transition. There's a collective responsibility to be pioneers, to be trailblazers, because it's an amazing test bed. It's a small country with a lot of money that can try new things, that can afford to be risk takers. But also, there's a cultural connection to nature here in Norway that's I'm still, it's been contagious for me. And it's been one of the more fulfilling parts of my journey here is, when anyone thinks about Norway, they think about, it's fjords and it's amazing and the mountains and that's with good reason. It is with good reason, because the stuff is stunning and it's beautiful. And I think growing up, I got to taste it and I got to see it during the summer, and you kind of get that jaw-dropping feeling. But living in it and having it be a part of your everyday, you learn to just have a different appreciation for it and how important it is and how nurturing it is to live around. And the idea of risking that because of climate change and because of poor energy management there's a kind of inherent urgency that we have to protect this. And that's a definite part of the equation as well.
Let's talk about the reaction of the rest of the planet on what is going on in the energy space in Norway, given the culture that I can speak to in my experiences, not just in Oslo, but also in Stockholm and around the Nordics. I'm wondering if it changes, if we think about the skill set or the skill sets that might be needed for an entrepreneur entering into Startup Lab as sort of a backdrop. When we think of startups and entrepreneurs in America, it's that, maybe you want to be very public facing and be really good at communicating, and you might go on the edge and sort of state abilities that you may not have yet, but you're incredibly confident. And yet the culture there, that my experience is, it's a little bit more reserved, not really big about shining a light, right? This is not about personal brand as it might be where I reside, right? And so I'm wondering, as more and more things are achieved there, do we think that will start to influence the next generation, even younger than you and your colleagues there, in the types of talents that will be required, not just sort of a nice to have, but will be required to operate in a global economy? Because you can't just sort of say, yeah, but culturally we don't like to shine a light, because at some point America is going to need the innovation that is coming out of Oslo to support our way of life as well. And we kind of need maybe to sort of step up and embrace the light that we'd like to shine your way. Talk a little bit about your perspective on skill sets and how that may change over time. And those watching, you can just see Karl's look on his face.
I'm smiling because it's like this is why you're a professional. I mean, you that is a to the core question. That it's without a doubt, it's in the Norwegian culture to be more humble, more. There's actually a word for it. It's called janteloven, which is basically the idea that everyone's equal, and both kind of we take care of everyone. We have a society that is, it's an amazing healthcare system because of this, and there are absolute pros. But the flip side of the coin is that it can sometimes, in the startup world specifically, it can make you feel a little bit, I shouldn't promise more than I have, and I should wait a little bit longer until my tech is ready, because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And again, these are all very good sentiments to have, but in Norway, sometimes it can be, again, this is my opinion and coming from an American perspective and background, and having seen the opposite end of the spectrum, where I know that people wildly overpromise and oftentimes underdeliver. There's an absolute balance and a kind of waiting that needs to happen, where the founders who are building these amazing technologies, part of my frustration or my inspiration is like, hey, this is amazing. I want you to talk about this. I want you to be proud of this. I want you to stand on stage and yell from the mountaintop that this is what you're doing, because I think it's so incredible. And so that is, and whether or not that cultural change happens in the next generation, I think it's a necessity. I think it has to happen, because I do think that there's like you said, a need for this technology to get out. There's a need for Norway to take this pole position, and just to kind of say that and do that and say, hey, this is Sustainability Valley. This is where things are going to happen on the clean tech side of things. Requires a level of bravery to go out and say that. It requires a level of vulnerability as well to go out and say that this is where things are happening. And that's not inherently in the traditional Norwegian mindset. And again, it's very different here. The founders, people who are starting these companies, are much more outward going. They are amazing. Again, there's exceptions to all these rules, and they are incredibly talented on stage. But if you compare it culturally and kind of an ecosystem, let's drill it down to more startups. You compare those two, the US versus Norway, there's absolutely a more reservedness. There's more of a hesitancy to overpromise, which, in my opinion, needs to get turned down, because they need to. When you're a founder and you're my investor, and I'm pitching to you. I need you to be convinced about the idea, how this is going to look in 5 years. I need you to buy in, especially in the earliest stages, that, hey, this is going to be worth $1 billion in 10 years. You got to jump aboard. And that's far from what I have today. So a big part of the founder and CEO job is to be able to convince you and sell you on the fact that this is worth investing in, because I'm going to be able to, over time, build something that's super valuable. It's not there yet, but it's going to get there. And that is something that Americans are really good at. And it's inherent in the US culture, in the American culture. And it's something that comes more difficultly to Norwegians, to the Norwegian culture. It's a little bit more, safe. But because of that, when you work with Norwegian companies, you are going to get what you promised. And that's been the beautiful side of it, is that they deliver. They won't overpromise and underdeliver. You're going to get what you kind of agreed to.
That's a great point and a great close on that, because it is. I mean, it's not just, we have to advance in more of a comprehensive way to understand the benefits of what we've been building over time and the legacies and how that's impacted our development while we take in new information. Let's talk about, because I think you are uniquely positioned as the head of energy at Startup Lab. Let's talk about advice that you might have for entrepreneurs. Maybe it is entrepreneurs that are in Houston or LA or in Ridgefield, Connecticut. But when we think about skill sets and you think about how your skills have translated in another culture, because I love that when you talked about earlier the Startup Lab, one of the things you have to do is you have to have an international approach and lens that you look through when you're developing the products in tech and maybe in clean energy that one is doing. And so I'm curious as to the skill sets you think entrepreneurs need to have as they're growing and developing. I mean, we have, even here locally, we have a high school that has an entire program just for entrepreneurs. And I think this is only going to be the norm. So we're going to get younger and younger kids. I mean, my fourth grader just presented to entrepreneurs about an idea with his classmates. That would have never, that didn't happen in the 80s, Karl. And I think that will then change. It's either that the market's going to change, or it's going to be that the younger people are going to say, these are the things that we need more access and experience and exposure to so that we can succeed in a gig economy and an economy that's focused on climate and clean energy and tech and these sorts of things, because we've got to protect our planet. Otherwise, what in the world is the point, right? So what are some skills that you think, what's advice that you have for entrepreneurs, whether it's about global perspective or approaches to working with different cultures?
That's a great question too. I think that it can vary a lot. You have different you will look around the 300 plus people that are in the building here. And the type of person varies a ton. And so there's not a cookie cutter. This is who an entrepreneur is. You have technical backgrounds, you have salespeople, so I think, but if you kind of start to draw a thread between all of them, is they're all incredibly driven. They have a work ethic that is really high. They're able to push themselves. They're able to, they're able to motivate themselves as well. They don't need external motivation to accomplish what they say they're going to do. Because when you're in an early stage company, you don't have, and in most cases, especially as a founder, you don't have anyone sitting over you and telling you, hey, you got to get this done. If you don't do it, you don't get anywhere. And then I also think you have to have a level of bravery and ambition that forces you to be vulnerable, forces you to be confident and accepting of failure. That's absolutely something that we see here all the time, is people fail all the time, but they don't fail forever. They fail, and then they're like, okay, well, shoot, I figured out that this doesn't work and this doesn't work. But turns out what I had never considered is actually what everyone's thinking about. And the fact that, now we've pivoted to this, we know that these two don't work, but this is a gold mine. Okay, let's go after it. And so that person failed 3 times and was comfortable failing and being told no and being rejected, but kept going. And I think, you can read there's entrepreneur books that'll tell you this way better than I can articulate it. But I think what Rolf has taught me too, what he looks for is you have to have a level of passion about for what you're working on. And that's one of the key things we look for, because we know it's going to be such a roller coaster, because we know the lows are going to be so low. If you hit two of these lows and you're in it for the money, if you're in it for the big exit, that's not going to be motivating enough for you to keep going. That's not going to be, you're going to get kicked in the mouth twice. And if it's the idea of a payout 5 years from now, 7 years from now is what you're going for, it's not going to push you through that adversity. If you're passionate about what you're working on and you have a sense that this is an important product that needs to get made, this is an important piece of technology that the world needs, and you have all the other skill sets we talked about, then you're going to be successful, because then you're going to keep saying, well, yeah, I know I failed this time, but this is still something that needs to get made, or this is still something that the world needs. And I have a personal passion for it. Then this roller coaster becomes a lot more easy to ride. And those are the ones that end up making the money, because they're the ones who end up being successful and are able to push through, those kicks in the teeth 10 times, because, well, I was passionate, and you stuck with it for 10 years. And because of that, you built an amazing company, an amazing product, and you sold it for however many millions and millions that the ambition is. But from Rolf's perspective, it's passion. And that is, the longer I stay here, the more exposure I get to these founders, the more cases I see. It couldn't be more true.
Well, you embody the list that you just went down. You really do. When I think about just the bravery of crossing an ocean and taking a number of risks. I think that I'm looking at the future CEO of an energy company, global energy company. You've got that talent. I think it's important to share stories of people that are pushing the envelope. It's not just about sort of the gray hairs or the legacy, folks out there. It's about the generation that is on the come, that can organize their thoughts, inspire people, and drive new solutions. And I think you have that in spades. And this is why, through those 4 interviews, they said, no, we've got to have Karl here. This makes just too much sense. I want to make sure, Karl, people can learn more about you, and that they can find the Startup Lab. If they want to sort of learn more about some of the companies there, where should they go?
There's a lot. You can startuplab.no is where our website is. You can find all the information there. All our contact information is there on the team page. LinkedIn is a great way to reach out to us. But the website is a great place to start. If you're a founder listening and you want to get in touch with us, there's an application process there. If you're an energy investor, or you're an investor interested in investing in climate tech, feel free to reach out to me, because we have tons of companies that are interested in, especially raising money from the US. Getting investors from the US is one of the best things that can happen to a company from here, because it helps A, break into the market, but B, also gives that kind of sense of validation that this is a product that is ready for scaling. So if you're listening and you're interested in climate tech or energy, feel free to reach out to me. And again, my information is on the website, so startuplab.no is where you can find us.
Well, this has been a treat. And so for anybody out there that's mountain biking through the beauty, the landscape that is Norway, you might want to look under the helmet of the guy passing you. It's either Justin Timberlake on vacation or Karl Liapunov thinking about the next solution to support planet Earth. What a great joy to have Karl join us. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. Thanks for taking the plunge into HeadRoom, where we uncover the why behind the what and who impacting our lives. HeadRoom is a production of Rainlight and co-produced by our friends at Old Soul. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and this is HeadRoom.